It was a quiet evening when Emma stumbled upon the first clue. As she sifted through the bills, a single piece of paper slipped from a stack of receipts, something that shouldn't have been there. She picked it up, her heart racing as her eyes scanned the figures, the unfamiliar numbers, and a name she had never seen before. It was a small detail, but in the pit of her stomach, Emma felt a cold sense of dread. Something was very wrong. Emma had always been seen as the quiet, intelligent, and resourceful woman behind her successful ex-husband Daniel. From the outside, their life appeared perfect, well-dressed, a beautiful house, successful careers, and an adorable child. They were the couple that everyone envied, with a relationship that seemed unshakable. But underneath the surface, cracks had begun to form. Emma could feel it, though she hadn't yet put her finger on what was wrong. It started with small, almost imperceptible changes. Late nights at the office, unexplained absences, and distant conversations. At first, she dismissed them as the natural stress of their busy lives, but deep down, she felt the growing unease. Emma knew something was off. She just couldn't figure out what. One day, while going through their financial documents to prepare for an upcoming family vacation, she found something that made her heart skip a beat. A series of unexplained transactions, suspiciously large sums of money leaving their joint account. At first, she thought it was a mistake or a misunderstanding, but as she dug deeper, the evidence became impossible to ignore. A hidden bank account, linked to Daniel's name, and an alarming pattern of withdrawals. Emma confronted Daniel about it, but he brushed it off, offering weak excuses and promises that it was all just a mistake. But Emma wasn't convinced. She began to notice other signs: long phone calls, secretive texts, and a growing emotional distance between them. The nagging feeling of betrayal became undeniable. She wasn't just dealing with a simple misunderstanding, her life was beginning to unravel. Determined to uncover the truth, Emma took matters into her own hands. She hired a private investigator to gather more information. The investigator uncovered a shocking revelation. Daniel had been having an affair with a colleague from his company, a woman named Lily, who worked closely with him on high-profile projects. Emma's heart shattered as the evidence piled up. The betrayal was not only emotional, but professional, with secrets that reached far beyond their marriage. But Emma wasn't the type to lash out impulsively. She knew that if she were to take any action, it had to be calculated, meticulous. The consequences of confronting Daniel without a plan would only leave her vulnerable. She had to be strategic, biding her time until the right moment arrived. Revenge, she realized, would require patience and precision. As Emma continued to gather evidence, she couldn't help but feel a sense of cold clarity settle over her. The facade of their perfect marriage was just that, a facade. Behind it was a web of lies, deceit, and betrayal. And while Daniel was still blissfully unaware of her discovery, Emma knew one thing for sure: their life would never be the same. Now, armed with the truth and a burning desire for justice, Emma began plotting her next move. She wasn't just going to walk away. No, she would make sure that Daniel's lies would cost him everything, one step at a time. The sound of the doorbell echoed through the house, but it wasn't the usual ring. It was different, urgent, almost as if it carried a hidden warning. Emma froze, her hand still gripping the envelope containing the latest report from the private investigator. She had expected this moment to come, but now that it had, she couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The truth was getting closer. Too close. Emma had already gathered a disturbing amount of evidence: bank statements, hidden accounts, texts. And now, the investigator had uncovered something far worse: a hidden relationship between Daniel and Lily, his colleague. But there was more. As Emma pieced together the puzzle, the picture that emerged was darker than she could have ever imagined. Daniel had been more than just unfaithful. He had been conspiring with Lily to siphon money from their company. Under the guise of business expenses, they had been transferring large sums of money into offshore accounts. What Emma had once dismissed as a simple affair was now part of a far-reaching financial scandal. Emma's mind raced. She had to act fast, but every move had to be strategic. The stakes were higher than she had ever anticipated. Despite the growing fear in her chest, Emma kept her composure. She knew the consequences of taking the wrong step. The walls of their world were starting to close in on her. But she wasn't going to let Daniel's betrayal ruin her life. She was going to take control, carefully, quietly, and with precision. With this new information, Emma realized that there was one thing left to do: turn the tables. It wasn't enough to simply confront Daniel. She had to build a network of people who would help her expose his lies and take back the power he had stolen from her. Emma reached out to an old friend, Claire, who had a background in law and business. Together, they began to formulate a plan. Claire was the first to confirm what Emma already suspected. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was professional. Daniel's affair wasn't a casual fling. It had been part of a calculated effort to undermine Emma's position within the company and secure a future for himself and Lily. With each passing day, Emma became more resolved to destroy Daniel's empire, piece by piece. The plan took shape, slowly. Emma knew that exposing Daniel's betrayal in the public eye would not only damage his career, but also destroy his relationship with the board of directors. His reputation was fragile, built on the illusion of trust and loyalty. Once that illusion was shattered, there would be no place left for him to hide. But the hardest part was yet to come. Emma had to decide how far she was willing to go. She could see the toll this was taking on her child, who was becoming more withdrawn with each passing day. The emotional cost of her revenge was something she had to weigh carefully. But what was the price of justice? Was it worth sacrificing her family's peace of mind to get back at the man who had wronged her? As the weeks went on, Emma's resolve only grew stronger. She wasn't just fighting for her dignity or her reputation. She was fighting for her child's future and for the life she had worked so hard to build. And Daniel, for all his arrogance, had no idea what was coming. The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by the sound of Emma's fingers tapping against the desk. Her plan was set in motion now. There was no turning back. She could already feel the weight of her actions, but the thrill of taking control overshadowed the unease. Her first move was already in place. She was going to strike Daniel's career, his reputation, where it hurt the most. Her first target was the company Daniel had worked tirelessly to climb the ranks in. Emma had done her homework, gathering intel from multiple sources, including Claire, who had been quietly digging into Daniel's dealings at work. It was clear that Daniel had been abusing his position to funnel money into his secret accounts, but Emma needed concrete evidence of his professional misconduct. This wasn't just about an affair anymore, it was about a corporate crime that could bring him down. Emma had contacted a former business associate of Daniel's, a rival company, owner named Robert, who had always harbored animosity toward Daniel's rise in the business world. Robert, though reluctant at first, agreed to help once he learned the scope of Daniel's betrayal. Robert provided Emma with crucial documents, emails, internal reports, and meetings that Daniel had tried to bury. The evidence was damning, enough to put Daniel in a very precarious position. With the documents in hand, Emma knew she had to be careful. If Daniel suspected she was behind the leak, he would fight back, and her plans would crumble before they even started. So, she took a calculated risk. She sent the documents anonymously to the board of directors, along with an anonymous tip about Daniel's financial misconduct. The impact was almost immediate. Within hours, Daniel received a call from his boss, the CEO of his company. The board had discovered the irregularities, and an emergency meeting was called. As Emma sat in her living room, watching the evening news, she couldn't help but smile. The first piece of her plan was falling into place. Daniel's position at the company was now under serious scrutiny. The walls were closing in on him, and he had no idea that Emma was the one pulling the strings. But Emma wasn't done. She wasn't just going to watch as Daniel's career unraveled. The next phase of her plan was already taking shape. The press had caught wind of the scandal, and Emma knew it wouldn't be long before they started asking questions about Daniel's personal life too. His affair with Lily was about to become public knowledge, and that was where Emma would hit him the hardest. As the days passed, Emma continued to keep a low profile, watching from the shadows as Daniel's world began to shift. She kept close tabs on the board's response, knowing that a single misstep could jeopardize everything. The tension in their home was palpable. Daniel was no longer the confident, powerful man he once was. His once untouchable image had begun to crack. Emma could see the signs of stress beginning to take their toll on Daniel. He became more irritable, snapping at her for the smallest things. But Emma remained calm, knowing that everything was going according to plan. The more desperate Daniel became, the more mistakes he would make. One night, as they sat together for dinner, Daniel let something slip, an offhand remark about a meeting with the board. Emma barely reacted, though her mind was racing. She knew exactly what he was talking about. The board meeting was going to happen the next morning. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The first phase of her revenge had already crippled his career, and the next phase would shatter his reputation. But Emma had to stay patient. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a quick confrontation. She would take her time, carefully dismantling everything he had worked for until there was nothing left but the bitter taste of his own lies. The calm before the storm was suffocating. Emma had orchestrated her moves meticulously, but now it was time for the final act of her plan to unfold. She stood in front of the mirror, rehearsing the words she would say when the time came to confront Daniel. But for now, she needed to let the storm she had set in motion do its work. It all started with the anonymous tip she had sent to the media. Emma knew that once the board of directors began to turn against Daniel, the press would follow close behind. And sure enough, it wasn't long before rumors began to swirl about Daniel's financial misconduct and his extramarital affair with Lily. The media, hungry for a scandal, picked up the story quickly, and soon headlines were plastered across every news outlet in town. The most damning report was a deep dive into Daniel's business practices, how he had misused company funds to support his affair, funding lavish trips and expensive gifts for Lily under the guise of business expenses. Emma knew the damage had already been done, but it wasn't enough. She had to ensure that Daniel's fall from grace was as public as possible. He needed to feel the full weight of his betrayal, and she was prepared to deliver it. The first real blow came the day of the board meeting. As expected, the board members demanded Daniel's resignation after reviewing the evidence of his financial misconduct. But Emma wasn't satisfied yet. Her goal wasn't just to see him out of the company. She wanted to strip him of his dignity, his reputation, and everything he had once believed made him untouchable. The day after Daniel was forced to step down, Emma arranged for a private investigator to capture footage of him and Lily together in a public setting. It wasn't just about exposing the affair anymore. It was about showing the world the extent of Daniel's hypocrisy. The video of him and Lily walking hand in hand in a luxurious restaurant spread like wildfire, sending shockwaves through the media. Emma watched the headlines rise. CEO's secret affair exposed. Billionaire's career in ruins. Corporate scandal rocks the business world. It was everything she had hoped for. And more. Daniel's professional career was crumbling in front of his eyes, but it was the destruction of his public image that would truly take him down. At home, Emma couldn't hide the satisfaction that bubbled within her, but she knew that this victory was only temporary. There was still more to be done, and the cost of her revenge was beginning to show. Her child had been growing increasingly withdrawn, and Emma could sense the tension in the house. The emotional toll of the battle was taking its toll on both of them. Still, she refused to let guilt cloud her resolve. She couldn't afford to falter now. One evening, Daniel came home late, his face drawn and defeated. His appearance was a far cry from the confident, self-assured man Emma had once known. He had lost everything: his job, his wealth, his reputation. But what hurt the most was the look in his eyes, the realization that everything he had built had been shattered by the very woman he had betrayed. For the first time in years, Emma saw him for what he truly was: weak, desperate, and powerless. It was a moment she had long awaited, but there was no satisfaction in it. Daniel had no answers, no defense. His empire was crumbling, and there was nothing left for him to salvage. And yet, Emma knew this was only the beginning. The hardest part was still ahead: the battle for their child's future, and the showdown that would finally make her the victor in this war of betrayal. As she sat in her office, watching the media coverage unfold, Emma's mind raced. The next phase was already in motion. The corporate world had turned its back on Daniel, but the personal battle was far from over. Emma's victory over Daniel in the corporate world was just the beginning. As the battle for their child's custody loomed, she knew that she had to be just as strategic in the courtroom as she had been in her business dealings. This wasn't just about money, power, or revenge. It was about ensuring her child would grow up in a safe, loving environment, far removed from the chaos and dysfunction Daniel had created. Daniel's lawyers came at her with everything they had. They painted her as unstable, as someone who had allowed her emotions to dictate her actions. They used the press coverage of her business dealings against her, attempting to make it seem like she was more interested in her career than in her child's well-being. But Emma was prepared. She had been collecting evidence for months, quietly, building a case that would expose Daniel for what he truly was. The courtroom was a battleground, and Emma wasn't about to lose. She presented her evidence: emails, financial records, even testimonies from colleagues and former friends of Daniel, who had seen his darker side. The picture she painted was one of neglect, irresponsibility, and emotional abuse. It wasn't just about what he had done to her. It was about the environment he had created for their child, one that was toxic, unstable, and unhealthy. The most damning evidence, however, came from a series of interviews with the people closest to Daniel. They had all seen his erratic behavior, his drunken rages, and the way he used his power to manipulate others, including Emma. One by one, these witnesses came forward, and their testimonies struck a blow to Daniel's defense. The walls he had built around himself began to crumble, and his arrogance faltered. Emma, on the other hand, remained composed. She had worked tirelessly to build a life that would be stable for her child, and it showed. She had surrounded herself with people who cared about her and her child's future, including a team of child psychologists who testified to the positive environment Emma had created. It was clear that her home was a sanctuary, a place of safety and love, a stark contrast to the chaos Daniel had inflicted. The final moment came when the judge, after hearing all the evidence, delivered their ruling. Emma was awarded full custody of their child. Daniel's face went pale, his eyes filled with disbelief and fury, but there was nothing he could do. The evidence was irrefutable. Emma had won. As Emma left the courtroom, holding her child's hand, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. This battle, the one she had fought not for herself, but for her child, was over. She had secured their future, ensuring that they would never have to face the horrors of Daniel's world again. But even as the victory settled in, Emma knew that the war wasn't over. Daniel would fight back in other ways, and there would be more challenges ahead. But for now, she had won the most important battle of all. She had protected her family, and that would always be her greatest victory. The storm had passed, but Emma was far from finished. She had successfully destroyed Daniel's career, exposing his lies and forcing his downfall. But now it was time to rebuild, on her own terms. She'd always been underestimated, her strength hidden beneath the surface. But now she was ready to show the world what she was truly capable of. The first step was to take control of the company Daniel had built his reputation around. Kwamachu had carefully studied every angle, every possible move. She had gathered allies who shared her vision, including Robert, the business rival who had helped expose Daniel's corruption. Together, they began to implement a strategy that would take over the company Daniel once led. With the board of directors in disarray, Emma moved quickly. She knew the power vacuum left by Daniel's resignation was a golden opportunity. Her plan was to sweep in and take over, but not as a mere figurehead. She wanted to change the direction of the company, to restore its integrity and make it a true force in the industry. Without Daniel's toxic influence, Emma had already started aligning herself with key players in the company. Her quiet determination had earned her the respect of several board members who were eager for a new direction. They had seen the damage Daniel had done, and they were ready to move on. With Emma at the helm, they could finally begin the process of restoring the company's reputation. But Emma didn't stop there. She knew that to truly take control, she had to make a statement. She initiated a series of meetings with top investors, promising them a future built on transparency, hard work, and ethical business practices. Her pitch was convincing, and within days, she secured the funding needed to take full control of the company. As Emma signed the papers that officially transferred the company's leadership to her, a sense of empowerment surged through her. She had done it. She had taken something that Daniel had built, something he had worked so hard to manipulate and control, and she had turned it into her own success. She wasn't just taking control of a company, she was taking back her life, her future, and her family's future. The changes Emma implemented were swift and decisive. She introduced new policies that ensured transparency at every level of the company. She cleaned house, replacing corrupt executives who had been loyal to Daniel with a new team who shared her vision. She made it clear that the company would no longer tolerate the unethical practices that had once been so common under Daniel's leadership. Despite the turmoil, Emma's leadership was already starting to pay off. Employee morale improved, investors began to show renewed confidence, and the company's reputation began to rebound. Emma knew that it wasn't going to be easy, and there were still obstacles ahead, but she was ready. She had fought for this, and she would protect it with everything she had. At home, the atmosphere was tense. Daniel's attempts to retaliate were becoming more frequent. He had hired a lawyer to challenge the legal decisions surrounding the custody of their child. But Emma was prepared. She had anticipated this move, and her legal team was already working on a counterattack. Every step of her plan had been calculated, and she wasn't about to let Daniel's desperate attempts to regain control undo everything she had worked for. For the first time since the beginning of the conflict, Emma allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had not only taken control of the company, but had also reclaimed the power she had once been denied. Daniel's world was crumbling, and hers was just beginning to rise from the ashes. The company had been her first victory, but there was still more to be done. The battle for their child's future was still ongoing, and Emma knew that her fight wasn't over. But one thing was certain. She was no longer the woman she had been before all of this began. She was stronger, sharper, and more determined than ever. Emma stood at the window of her new office, looking out over the city that had once been a symbol of her failures, now a reflection of her triumphs. The chaos and turmoil of the past months had led her to this moment, the culmination of everything she had worked for. But despite her success, there was a lingering sense of emptiness that even the highest of achievements couldn't fill. This was a victory, yes, but it came at a cost. Daniel's life had unraveled completely. His reputation was in tatters, his financial resources dwindling to nothing, and the legal battles over custody of their child had drained what little remained of his spirit. He no longer had the luxury of playing the victim. The media, which had once fawned over his every move, now turned on him with merciless headlines, portraying him as the embodiment of corporate greed and personal betrayal. His fall from grace had been swift and brutal, a stark contrast to the life he had once known. But even as Daniel's world collapsed around him, Emma remained focused on what truly mattered: her child. The court battle had been long and grueling, but in the end, Emma had triumphed. She had proven her case, exposing Daniel's neglect and the emotional damage he had caused. The judge awarded her full custody, a victory that left her feeling both relieved and vindicated. Her child, now in a stable and loving environment, was the one thing that had kept her grounded throughout this ordeal. Emma's new life was a reflection of her transformation. The company she had taken control of was thriving under her leadership. She had implemented sweeping changes that not only restored its reputation, but propelled it into a new era of growth. Investors were pleased, employees were motivated, and the industry began to take notice of her as a force to be reckoned with. She had built something from the ground up, something that Daniel could never take away from her. Still, there was no room for complacency. Emma knew that her journey wasn't over. There were always new challenges on the horizon. But for the first time, she felt in control. She was no longer defined by the betrayal that had once threatened to break her. She had taken the pain, the anger, and the heartache and turned it into something greater. Her success was not just a result of ambition, it was a testament to her resilience. As Emma sat in her office late one evening, reflecting on everything that had brought her here, she received a call from her lawyer. Daniel had made one last attempt to contest the custody ruling, hoping for a final chance to regain some semblance of control over his life. Emma listened, expressionless, as her lawyer outlined his request. It was clear now that Daniel had nothing left to lose, but Emma was done playing his games. She was done with his manipulation and lies. "No," she said firmly, her voice unwavering. "Let him go. I've already won." In the end, it was the final confrontation, the battle that Emma had waged, not just for justice, but for her own sense of redemption. Daniel's relentless pursuit of power had cost him everything. But Emma had emerged from the ashes stronger, smarter, and more determined than ever to protect her future and her family. She had started as a woman broken by betrayal, but now she stood as a force of nature. Her life was hers to shape, and no one, not Daniel, not anyone, could take that away.